The end of the X-Men franchise. And unfortunately, we ended on one of the worst movies of the franchise. X-Men Dark Phoenix, or just Dark Phoenix, directed by Simon Kinberg, the guy that wrote X-Men The Last Stand and was the producer and writer for some of these X-Men films. This movie brings back James McAvoy as Professor Charles Xavier, Michael Fassbender as Magneto, Jennifer Lawrence is back as Mystique, Nicholas Hoult as Beast, Sophie Turner from Game of Thrones as Jean Grey, Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, Alexandria Shipp as Storm, Evan Peters as Quicksilver, Cody Smit-McPhee as Nightcrawler, Coda Eberhardt as Selene, the Black Queen, and finally Jessica Chastain as our villain Vuk. Who's Vuk? The plot of this movie takes place in the early 90s, and yet our actors have not aged really at all. There's no makeup to make them look older from the previous movies, which is weird considering that James McAvoy's character in 8 years, he's supposed to become Patrick Stewart, and you don't do anything to make him look older. But who cares? This is the last X-Men movie before the MCU takes control of the franchise. They probably won't do anything with the X-Men for quite a few years, and hopefully they'll never do the Phoenix Saga, or if they do the Phoenix Saga, they will do it right, because this movie once again botches it up, and probably botches up a demand to ever see the Phoenix Saga ever be done on the big screen, because this movie was terrible. Anyway, the X-Men have to do a space mission in this movie. There are some astronauts that are in outer space, and they are about to get hit by what looks like to be a solar flare. The president contacts Charles Xavier and asks the X-Men to go into outer space to save the astronauts. The X-Men go into their jet, the Blackbird, or the X-Jet, to save the astronauts, but Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, is left behind in the space shuttle. She absorbs the solar flare, and this unlocks the Phoenix powers stored inside of her and amplifies her psychic powers. You have this alien race called the Debari, led by Jessica Chastain's character Vuk, who want the Phoenix power for their own evil purposes. Jean Grey can't seem to control the Phoenix Force, and she's worried that she could hurt her friends and other people. She goes to Magneto for help, and that's pretty much our movie. Now, I was really not looking forward to this movie because I had a feeling this movie was going to be bad. A couple people online that do like X-Men movies were predicting that this movie was going to be bad. Comic Book Girl 19 is a big X-Men fan, and she didn't think that Fox was going to do this story right. I didn't think Fox was going to do this story right. The guy from Council Geeks didn't think that this movie was going to be done right. And fortunately, we were all correct. This movie is terrible. The reviews have not been good for this movie. It's like 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. It is a terrible, terrible movie. Let's get into the positives of this movie, because there were some good things about this movie, but despite that, this movie is really bad. First of all, Sophie Turner is pretty good as Jean Grey. I did like her in the movie, and the effects with the Phoenix Force inside of her was done pretty well. I did like Cody Smit-McPhee as Nightcrawler. James McAvoy is very good as Charles Xavier. He's been very good ever since he was casted in First Class, so no real complaints here. Alexandria Shipp is much better in this movie as Storm than Halle Berry was in the previous X-Men movies, the original trilogy. I did like her in the movie. Ty Sheridan was pretty good as Cyclops. Michael Fassbender was pretty good as Magneto. I did like him in the movie. And I did like Coda Eberhardt as Selene the Black Queen. And I did like the climax of the film, which is on a train where the X-Men and Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants had to team up against Jessica Chastain and the Dabari. Let's get into the negatives of this movie. First of all, I hate Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique. The only movie that I liked her as Mystique was X-Men Days of Future Past. I really think they miscast Mystique and they should have gotten a different actress, or maybe brought back Rebecca Stamos as the character, because Jennifer Lawrence sucks as Mystique and this is her worst performance. Thankfully she's not in the movie that much, but what she does get in this movie, she's terrible. Lines in this movie where she says that the women have been saving the men in the teams and they're doing the most of the heroics. Since when? Who saved the X-Men in Apocalypse when the mansion was about to blow up? That was a guy named Quicksilver, if I remember right. So I didn't like that line in the movie, and you can tell she doesn't even want to be here, and a lot of these actors are really not putting that good a performance into this movie. Some of them feel like they're phoning it in. Nicholas Hoult doesn't do that good a performance as Beast. There's really only like one or two scenes where he really feels engaged as Beast. Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, I thought he was okay, but through much of this movie he's being worried about Jean, and you can almost like do a drinking game of how many times he says Jean throughout this movie, but it's kind of understandable though. Michael Fassbender as Magneto, he's basically doing the same thing he does in the other X-Men movies, which is being the other side of the debate when it comes to dealing with mutants versus Charles Xavier's point of view, and his point of view in regards to Jean Grey. And I almost think he really wasn't needed in this movie, even though he's used well within the context of the plot, because Magneto is not that big of a character within the Phoenix Saga in the comics. There's this new mutant that uses his hair as a weapon, these dreadlocks, and I'm thinking, what? That is the most ridiculous mutant power I have ever heard. Of all of the mutants you could have taken from the comics, you just create some random mutant that has dreadlock power? Really? That is stupid. And not all the special effects are that good. You can tell that the actors just couldn't wait until this movie was done so they can just say that they're done with the franchise, really. It's really not that good of a movie. It's terrible. If I was to rank this movie among the X-Men films, this movie is bad, but not as bad as X-Men Origins Wolverine. It's right above X-Men Origins Wolverine as far as being the worst X-Men movie. X-Men Origins Wolverine is the ultimate worst in my opinion, but this movie is right above it. This is really bad. I really hate the fact that they botched up the Phoenix Saga again. I actually like Last Stand more than this movie because I liked Kelsey Grammer as Beast, and I liked Ellen Page as Shadowcat, and the rivalry that was going on between Iceman and Pyro in that movie. But this movie is just really bad, and really shocking that this movie is so bad. The villains that are in this movie, the alien villains, the Dabari, they're so boring. And Jessica Chastain is such a generic villain. They wasted her in this film. She is such a terrific actress, and you give her such a boring character. She's about as bad of a villain as Malekith from Thor: The Dark World. That's how bad of a villain she is. She's not memorable at all. So overall, I hated this movie. This was such a bad movie. I'm gonna give this movie an F. I'm going straight to the F. Even though this movie does have some good points, I don't feel like it's worth giving it a D, really. And that's all I gotta say for X-Men Dark Phoenix. Don't bother seeing this movie. Go see Rocketman again, or go see Avengers Endgame again. Go see Secret Life of Pets 2. Anything but this movie. This movie sucks.